Hi, my name is Olivia Lee. I am 23 years old, and I just graduated in environmental biological sciences at the University of Chicago. It should have been a day filled only with joy, a day when I could finally hold my head high. After 4 years of relentless study, proud that I had at last proven my worth, my parents had spared no expense, renting out the luxurious rooftop of the Peninsula, Chicago, where the city lights glittered beneath our feet. A classical orchestra played softly, the perfect soundtrack for high society. But then, I saw it. My mother's diamond-ringed hand tilted, ever so slightly, over my cocktail. A fine white powder slipped neatly into the clear liquid. In that instant, the celebratory lights turned cold. This was not a graduation party. It was a calculated assassination. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. I watched the powder dissolve into the deep ruby liquid of the cocktail. My heart did not race. My breath did not hitch. In my line of work, panic is a luxury I cannot afford. As a clinical toxicologist, I knew exactly what was happening. My mother, Amanda, was settling a debt I did not even know I owed. I had been the silent investor in their version of a perfect family for 24 years, and now they were closing the account with a lethal surcharge. I did not cry. I did not scream for help. That would have been an inefficient use of resources. Instead, I picked up the glass with a steady hand. The classical music was still playing a violin solo that sounded like a dirge if you listened closely enough. I caught Amanda's eyes. She was watching me, waiting for the first sip, her face a mask of practiced philanthropic concern. Beside her, my father, Jonathan, adjusted his silk tie. He looked like he was presiding over a board meeting rather than his eldest daughter's murder. To them, I was just a business asset that had become too costly to maintain. Olivia, dear, are you not going to try it? Amanda asked. Her voice was sugary, but I could hear the edge of a jagged blade underneath. I did not answer right away. I looked at the glass, then at my sister Kayla. Kayla was the golden child, the shining jewel of the family, whose modeling career was funded by the very neurotoxic serum I was investigating. She was currently holding a glass of sparkling water, looking bored and entitled. She had spent her life taking, never once questioning where the resources came from. You know, Mom, I said, my voice as cold as the ice in my glass. Today is not just about me. It is about the legacy of this family. And Kayla has always been the one you have truly invested in. I turned toward my sister, a smile playing on my lips that did not reach my eyes. Kayla, you deserve this special treat, chilled to perfection, just like you like it. Think of it as a gift. For all your hard work, consider it a reward for being the perfect face of our family. I handed her the glass. It was a graceful movement, effortless and calculated. I watched her hand reach out and take it. In that moment, the power shifted. It was not an emotional outburst. It was a strategic transaction. I was transferring the liability. Amanda's face went from pale to ashen. She half reached out, her diamond-ringed hand trembling as she realized the trajectory of her own weapon. Her mouth opened to say something, but the words died in her throat. She could not stop it without admitting what she had done in front of Chicago's elite. She could not save her favorite child without destroying the facade she had spent 20 years building. Jonathan's hand tightened on the back of his chair, his knuckles turning white. They were trapped in the very theater they had built. Kayla did not hesitate. She never did, when something was offered to her for free. She tilted her head back and took a long, deep sip. Thanks, Liv, she said, her voice light and carefree. It is actually really good. You finally learned to share. I picked up her glass of water and brought it to my lips. The water was clean, safe, boring, everything my family was not. I watched them, watch her. The silence at our table was lethal. They were not shocked by the cruelty of their plan. They were paralyzed by the cold precision of my response. The jazz ensemble began a new set. Guests were laughing nearby, discussing real estate and summer galas. They had no idea that at our table, a balance sheet was being settled. My parents had overdrafted on my compassion for the last time. Now, they were going to have to deal with the interest. I spent 24 years existing on the margins of their frame, a ghost in a house of mirrors. In the Lee household, visibility was a currency I never possessed. My sister, Kayla, was the investment. I was the overhead cost they were finally ready to write off. I remembered the day I found the truth. It was 3 years ago, buried in the crawl space of my grandmother's old estate. While Jonathan and Amanda were busy auctioning off her furniture, I was salvaging her soul. I found her journals, leather-bound books filled with chemical equations, and the real foundation of what became our family's empire. Eleanor was the brilliant mind who developed the original compounds for the rejuvenation serum. My father, Jonathan, did not create a legacy. He committed a heist. He stole those formulas, erased Eleanor's name from the history of the company, and rebranded her genius as his own corporate brilliance. He did not build an empire, he colonized one. And I was the only person alive who had the receipts to prove it. Then there was the matter of the inheritance. $20 million. Eleanor knew exactly what kind of man her son was. She bypassed Jonathan and Amanda entirely, setting up a trust that would transfer to me the moment I graduated. That money was not just a gift, it was a target, painted in gold on my back. My parents did not see $20 million as a daughter's future. They saw it as a $20 million hole in their balance sheet that needed to be plugged. As I looked at Amanda's frozen smile, I realized why she could do it, why she could tilt her hand and drop death into my glass without a flicker of remorse. This is the trap of the normalization of cruelty. In families like mine, empathy is a luxury that does not provide a return on investment. They had spent decades normalizing the idea that people are merely tools or obstacles. To Jonathan and Amanda, I was not a human being with a pulse and a future. I was a non-performing asset. I was an employee who knew too much. I was a liability that had suddenly inherited $20 million of their potential capital. When you stop seeing your child as a person and start seeing them as a line item in a ledger, murder does not feel like a crime. It feels like a restructuring. They did not feel guilt because in their world, they were just protecting the company. They were protecting the Lee name. They had spent years practicing a specific kind of internal accounting where their status justified any sacrifice. Kayla was the face they could market. I was the truth they had to bury. I looked at the gold-rimmed plate in front of me. The steak was perfectly seared, the wine was aged, and the betrayal was ancient. My parents had spent my entire life trying to make me invisible. They wanted me to be a shadow that never cast a reflection. But they made a mistake. Shadows do not just disappear. They wait for the light to change. And tonight, the light was shifting. I checked my watch. 5 minutes since Kayla's last sip. The neurotoxin would be entering her system, now seeking out the pathways it was designed to rejuvenate and turning them into dead ends. I reached into my clutch and touched the cold metal of the encrypted drive I carried. It contained every forged document, every stolen patent, and every bit of data on the illegal dumping at the West facility. I was not just Olivia Lee, the disappointing daughter. I was the silent investor who had just decided to call in the debt. My parents had overdrafted on my silence for far too long. Now, I was here to collect. The first sign was the sway. Kayla's designer heels clacked unevenly against the marble floor as she reached for the back of her chair. Her face, which had been radiant with the arrogance of the golden child only moments ago, suddenly drained of all color. I watched her with a clinical detachment that would have terrified my younger self. As a toxicologist, I knew the exact onset timing of the cyclopentylamine derivative, the very substance Jonathan had been dumping into the city's water supply. It was hitting her central nervous system now. Then, the crystal glass slipped from her fingers. It shattered against the white marble, a sharp, ringing sound that cut through the soft jazz like a gunshot. Kayla's body began to stiffen, her hands clawing at the air, before she collapsed. Convulsions racked her frame as she hit the floor. The jazz ensemble stopped mid-bar, leaving a silence so heavy it felt physical. A high-pitched scream erupted from a socialite nearby, and the carefully curated atmosphere of the Peninsula Chicago disintegrated into pure, unadulterated chaos. Amanda did not rush to her daughter's side, not immediately. Her eyes, wide and wild with a different kind of fear, were fixed on me. Jonathan's mask of corporate brilliance finally cracked, revealing the predator beneath. He did not look at his dying investment on the floor. He looked at the asset that had dared to go rogue. He lunged forward, his grip on my arm like an iron vice. The drive, Olivia, he hissed through his teeth, his voice a low, lethal snarl. Give me the digital evidence of the West facility now, or you will not leave this penthouse alive. He thought he could still intimidate me. He thought fear was a lever he could pull to balance his books. But I had spent years in the cold, and I was finally acclimated to the temperature. Amanda found her voice then, but it was not the voice of a grieving mother. It was the voice of a socialite protecting a brand. She turned to the crowd, tears appearing on cue, a performance she had perfected over 20 years. Everyone, please, stay back, she cried, her voice echoing off the glass walls. My daughter, Olivia, she has had a mental breakdown. She has been hallucinating for months. She must have put something in her sister's drink. She is dangerous. The gaslighting was systematic, a desperate attempt to frame me before I could frame them. I did not answer. I did not argue. I just stood there, counting the seconds in my head as I felt the weight of the encrypted drive in my pocket. I had already contacted my associates at the Food and Drug Administration. I looked at the people I once called parents. They were not shocked by the cruelty of their plan. They were simply enraged that I had stopped playing along. This was not a family breakdown. It was a hostile takeover, and I was the majority shareholder of the truth. I did not waste breath defending my sanity to a crowd that was already broadcasting my supposed downfall. While Amanda shouted about my mental breakdown, her voice reaching a shrill, practiced pitch for the nearby reporters, I simply watched the data counter on my phone screen. I reached up and unpinned the silver brooch from my navy dress, the only item Jonathan had ever given me that carried any real weight. He thought it was a token of his status, a shiny object to keep the shadow daughter quiet. I had turned it into a clinical witness. The performance is over, Amanda, I said, my voice cutting through the panic with the precision of a scalpel. I did not look at Kayla, who was being attended to by 3 frantic guests. I looked directly at Jonathan. He was still holding my arm, his grip tightening as he realized I was not flinching. I did not put anything in her drink. You did. And unlike your falsified wastewater reports for the West facility, this recording does not have a margin for error. I tapped the screen of my tablet, and the high-definition feed from the brooch began to play on the large monitors around the rooftop screens that were supposed to show a montage of my childhood memories. Instead, the guests saw Amanda's diamond-ringed hand tilt. They saw the white powder slip into the deep ruby liquid. They saw the calculated, cold look on her face that matched the one she was wearing now. Jonathan's face drained of color as he looked at the screens. He let go of my arm as if I were radioactive. Olivia, we can negotiate this, he whispered, his transactional brain already looking for a settlement. Think about the brand. Think about your sister's life. I am thinking about the brand, Jonathan, I replied, stepping back to create a professional distance. That is why I have been working with the Food and Drug Administration for the last 4 months. The silence you have been using to build this empire has reached its expiration date. My compassion was a luxury you overdrafted years ago. Now the account is closed. The jazz music had been replaced by the sound of 100 smartphones recording the monitors. The silence Jonathan relied on was not just broken, it was being amplified across every social network in Chicago. Amanda tried to reach for the tablet, but I pulled it away. There were no tears in my eyes, only the clarity of a finished balance sheet. I do not need your tuition checks or your validation anymore, I told them, as the elevators chimed, signaling the arrival of the authorities. I have the data. And in my world, data is the only antidote that matters. The elevator doors slid open with a sharp chime. Paramedics flooded the rooftop, their orange vests a stark utilitarian contrast to the sea of black ties and silk gowns. They moved toward Kayla's convulsing form, their boots clattering against the marble. My parents tried to intercept them, but I was already there, blocking their path with the cold authority of a lead auditor. Heart rate is 180 beats per minute, I told the lead medic, ignoring the way Jonathan tried to shove me aside. Respiratory failure is imminent. This is not an accident or a medical anomaly. This is chemical poisoning. The medic looked at me, startled. How do you know that? I am a clinical toxicologist, I replied, my voice steady, echoing with the finality of a closing statement. The compound is cyclopentylamine derivative 47. It belongs to an experimental project codenamed R17. You will find it in the internal research archives of my father's cosmetics company. It causes immediate neurodisruption and long-term cellular decay. I turned to the crowd of onlookers, their phones still raised like glowing headstones. This substance was not just in that glass. It is the secret ingredient in my father's best-selling rejuvenation serum. They marketed it as an elixir of youth. In reality, it is a neurodegrading poison that yields a temporary aesthetic result before rotting the consumer from the inside out. My mother's face was not just pale anymore. It was the color of a bankrupt ledger. She is lying. She is trying to destroy us. She has always been jealous of this family. I am not destroying you, Amanda, I said, walking toward her with lethal precision. I am simply making the liabilities visible. I spent my final semester at the University of Chicago mapping the Calumet River. I found traces of derivative 47 in the groundwater near your West facility. You are not just poisoning me tonight. You have been poisoning this entire city for 5 years, dumping untreated toxic waste to bury the evidence of your serum's failures. The air in the room grew thin. This was not a family argument anymore. This was a public health catastrophe. I had just turned their private murder plot into a federal crime. The jazz music was a distant memory. Now, there was only the rhythmic thumping of the paramedics' equipment and the collective gasp of Chicago's elite as they realized the serum on their own vanity tables was a ticking time bomb. Jonathan lunged at me, his eyes wild with the desperation of a man watching his life's work liquidate in real time. I will kill you, you worthless burden. You should have died in that lab. I did not flinch. I did not even move. 2 police officers, alerted by the signals I had spent months coordinating with my associates, stepped between us. Jonathan Lee, the officer said, his voice like a gavel hitting the floor. You and your wife are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, document forgery, and gross violations of environmental law. I watched them being restrained. I did not feel a surge of joy. I did not feel the heat of revenge. I only felt the cool, clean air of an account finally settled. I had been a shadow in their empire for 24 years. Now, the empire was the shadow, and I was the only thing standing in the light. The rooftop of the Peninsula Chicago no longer felt like a palace. It felt like an evidence locker. The blue and red strobe lights from the police cruisers below reflected off the gold leaf columns, creating a chaotic rhythm that finally matched the internal state of my family. The jazz had been replaced by the heavy, rhythmic clack of boots as officers secured the perimeter. Jonathan and Amanda, the king and queen of Chicago's philanthropic circle, were no longer standing. They were on their knees. Jonathan's custom-tailored suit was crumpled, and Amanda's diamond necklaces looked like weights around her neck rather than ornaments of status. They were looking at me not with the calculated contempt I had grown up with, but with the naked, pathetic desperation of a beggar. The antidote, Olivia. Please. Jonathan choked out, his voice cracking like a dry riverbed. She is your sister. You have the knowledge. Just save her and we can make this all go away. $1 million. $5 million. Just tell us what you want. I stood over them, my hands steady in my pockets. I did not feel a rush of adrenaline. I did not feel the warmth of triumph. I only felt the cold, analytical satisfaction of a completed audit. You are still trying to negotiate with currency you do not have, I said, my voice clinical and flat. There is no making this go away. The transaction is complete. I watched them, and in that moment, I saw the truth that my grandmother had tried to warn me about. This was the illusion of power in an empty wallet. My parents' authority, their elegance, their very sense of self, it was never internal. It was a veneer they had rented with stolen patents and fraudulent accounts. When you build your entire identity on the external, on bank balances, social standing, and the ability to control others through wealth, you become a hollow vessel. Once the money is gone and the public mask is shattered, there is nothing left inside to hold you up. They were not just losing their company, they were losing the only version of themselves that ever existed. They were collapsing because without their money, they were effectively nobodies. The paramedics have the compound data, I continued, looking down at the legal notification glowing on my tablet. The antidote is already being administered. Kayla's life is in the hands of professionals now, not your business deals. I tapped the screen and showed Jonathan the red frozen icon across his accounts. 6 minutes ago, the Federal Bureau of Investigation executed a global freeze on all your personal and corporate assets. Lee Pharmaceuticals is no longer a business. It is a crime scene under federal supervision. You have $0, Jonathan. You have zero influence. Amanda let out a soft, broken sob, her forehead touching the marble floor. She looked like a collapsed marionette whose strings had been cut by the truth. You called me a worthless burden for 24 years, I said, turning my back on them as the officers moved in to read them their rights. But tonight, the only burden left is the weight of your own choices. Your empire did not fall. It was always an empty shell. I just finally let the air out. The city lights of Chicago are still there, glittering in the distance. But I watch them from a different vantage point now, the window of a modest, independent laboratory on the outskirts of the city. I funded this place with exactly $20 million, the inheritance my grandmother left to the only person she knew would actually use her genius to help people, not to harm them. I do not work for a corporation anymore. I work for the truth. My parents' empire did not just crumble. It was systematically dismantled by the very federal agencies they tried to deceive. Jonathan and Amanda are currently serving life sentences in a federal facility, their names no longer synonymous with philanthropy, but with the greatest corporate betrayal of the decade. Their bank accounts are empty, but more importantly, their influence is gone. They are finally realizing that their power was just an illusion, a veneer they had rented with stolen brilliance and fraudulent accounts. Beside me, Kayla is focused on a microscope, her brow furrowed in concentration. She is not the golden child anymore. She is a survivor. The neurotoxin left her with a slight tremor in her hands, a permanent reminder of the parents who saw her as a marketing asset rather than a daughter. But she chose to stay with me. She chose to learn the science she once mocked. For the first time in our lives, we are allies bound, not by the blood that tried to kill us, but by the work that is currently healing others. This is not the justice of punishment that was settled in a courtroom. This is what I call the justice of the sower. While my parents focused on the past and their decaying status, I am focused on the future. We are currently developing a true antidote for the neural damage caused by their serum, providing it for free to every community they poisoned for 5 years. I reached over and closed Eleanor's final journal. The leather was worn, the pages filled with the handwritten legacy my father tried to erase. I stared at the embossed cover for a moment, then I let out a breath I feel like I have been holding for 24 years. The cycle is broken. I am no longer a shadow or an invisible asset. I am simply Olivia. That night, I walked out of the lab and looked up at the stars. No noise, no guilt, no performance. Just the quiet, clean air of a life that is finally, undeniably, my own. True family is built on respect, not DNA. If this story moved you, hit like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Do not forget to subscribe for more stories of justice.